"You're late," he said, voice low but sharp enough to slice through the quiet hum of the chandelier above. And the words hung between them like a challenge as Emily Carter froze mid-step, a stack of papers trembling in her arms, her heart pounding in sync with the ticking of the massive grandfather clock by the foyer. Alexander Hayes, tall and impossibly composed, in a charcoal suit that caught the golden light from the windows just so, stepped closer, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor, each sound amplifying the tension. Yet his gaze softened fractionally as it landed on her eyes that sparkled with defiance and curiosity, the kind of spark he hadn't expected to see in someone who was supposed to simply follow rules and routines. She straightened, taking a careful breath, and their gazes locked, two worlds colliding silently, a battle of unspoken understanding and subtle power. And in that moment, Alexander felt the rare thrill of uncertainty, a crack in the armor of control he maintained so fiercely, while Emily, feeling the heat of his scrutiny, sensed the weight of expectations she had never encountered before. Yet something in the way he studied her suggested intrigue rather than judgment, and it made her pulse quicken in a way that was both thrilling and unnerving. The papers slipped from her grasp, fluttering like startled birds, forcing them into a shared action, a brush of hands that sent an electric current up her arm and held his attention captive, just for a heartbeat. And Alexander's mind, always so precise and calculated, flickered with thoughts of who she really was, what stories hid behind those quick eyes and deliberate movements, and why the simple act of being late could feel like destiny rather than error. A faint smile tugged at the corner of Emily's lips, unnoticed by all but him, and he recognized it as defiance tempered with grace, a rare combination that pulled him in despite his instincts to remain distant, to maintain the empire he ruled without complication. Yet in that instant, complication was irresistible, a magnetic pull that demanded focus and curiosity, and she, sensing the shift, held her ground, letting him see a fragment of the woman she was beyond the role of maid. And in that glance, unspoken questions and possibilities unfolded between them, leaving Alexander with a single, consuming thought. How could someone so ordinary seem so vital, so commanding of his attention, with nothing but a look? And as they both stood there in the foyer, surrounded by light, shadow, and the gentle echoes of the mansion, the air thick with anticipation, it was clear that a story had begun, one neither had fully chosen, yet one that would change everything he thought he knew about power, control, and the invisible threads that bind two people together. Emily quickly gathered the scattered papers, her fingers brushing the smooth edges as she tried to mask the tremor in her hands, while Alexander remained still, studying her every move, the golden light from the chandelier glinting off his watch, casting small reflections that danced across the marble floor. He leaned slightly against the carved banister, the faint aroma of his cologne mingling with the subtle scent of fresh flowers in the foyer, and Emily felt a strange mix of anxiety and curiosity, her mind racing to anticipate his reaction, yet unable to look away from the intensity in his eyes, which seemed to pull her forward and anchor her in the moment simultaneously. She placed the papers neatly on a nearby table, the soft thud echoing like a punctuation mark in the silent tension, and Alexander stepped closer, his shadow falling over the stack, drawing her gaze to his expression, a complex mixture of amusement, intrigue, and authority that made her pulse quicken with each passing second. The ambient light caught a loose strand of her hair, which fell over her forehead, and he instinctively reached out, a brief motion to tuck it behind her ear, hesitating, letting the moment linger, and she noticed the subtle care in his gesture, a rare glimpse of softness beneath the calculated exterior, making her heart skip and her thoughts scatter. The quiet was punctuated only by the distant sound of a clock chiming the hour, a reminder that time continued even as this encounter seemed to suspend reality, and Emily felt herself drawn into an unspoken conversation, one conveyed entirely through shared glances, small movements, and the electric hum of anticipation that hung thick between them. Alexander's eyes scanned her carefully, noting the slight arch of her brow, the determined set of her jaw, the way she held herself with quiet confidence despite the circumstances, and he realized that this moment, brief and seemingly ordinary, held a resonance that went beyond punctuality or protocol, hinting at the depth of character, resilience, and untold stories she carried within her. Emily, sensing his gaze, allowed a subtle smile to form, a delicate curve that acknowledged his attention without conceding anything, a silent statement that she was more than she appeared, that she had her own agency, and he found himself captivated, not by the title, the wealth, or the power that surrounded him, but by the human essence in front of him, a spark that defied his usual calculations and stirred a genuine curiosity and respect. The mansion seemed to breathe with them, the chandeliers shimmering, the polished floors reflecting fragments of their presence. And in this shared space, Emily realized that she was no longer merely late for a task, and Alexander understood that he was encountering something rare, something unpredictable, and together, in the hush of the grand foyer, they were unwittingly stepping into the beginning of a connection that neither time nor circumstance could easily define, leaving both on the edge of discovery and anticipation, poised for the unfolding of a story neither had expected. Alexander led Emily through the towering halls of the mansion, his presence commanding yet strangely inviting, the soft echo of their footsteps blending with the gentle hum of the heating system. And Emily felt a curious mixture of nerves and anticipation, her hands lightly brushing against the polished wood of the railing as they passed, noting the subtle details of the portraits hanging along the walls, the expressions frozen in time that seemed to observe her every move. He stopped by a large window overlooking the manicured gardens, sunlight streaming through the glass and casting intricate patterns on the floor, and gestured for her to stand there, the golden rays highlighting the determination and poise she carried effortlessly. And she realized in that quiet moment that she was being seen not as a maid, not as someone defined by tasks and schedules, but as an individual whose presence demanded attention and contemplation. Alexander, sensing the shift in energy, allowed a small smile to tug at the corner of his lips, a rare softness that contrasted with the calculated authority he normally exhibited. And he spoke, his voice low and deliberate, asking questions not about duties or schedules, but about her thoughts, her perspectives, and the small passions that animated her world. And Emily, surprised yet encouraged, answered candidly, revealing glimpses of her personality that she had never considered sharing within these walls, each word weaving a subtle connection that bridged the gap between two very different lives. As they spoke, a faint breeze drifted through the slightly open window, lifting a loose strand of her hair, and he instinctively reached out to brush it back, their eyes meeting with a spark of recognition, a silent acknowledgement of the unusual bond forming in the space between words and gestures. And in that fleeting contact, Emily felt a warmth and assurance she had not anticipated, while Alexander recognized the rare opportunity to witness authenticity and courage without pretense, something he had rarely encountered in his carefully constructed world. The room seemed to shrink around them, filled with the electricity of shared understanding, subtle smiles, and the unspoken promise of further discovery. As they navigated the delicate balance between curiosity and restraint, each movement, glance, and phrase carrying weight far beyond the moment, and Emily realized that the mansion, with all its grandeur and expectation, had become a backdrop for a story that was unfolding quietly, yet powerfully, in the space between them, leaving both with a sense of intrigue and anticipation that neither schedule nor circumstance could contain. And as they finally stepped away from the window, Alexander could not ignore the pull of interest and admiration that had begun to weave around Emily, and she, in turn, felt a newfound confidence and subtle exhilaration, understanding that a simple conversation, a measured step, and a shared gaze had shifted the boundaries of their day, opening the door to possibilities neither had foreseen, a delicate dance of intellect, curiosity, and silent fascination that promised more revelations with each passing moment. The soft glow of the afternoon sun filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows that stretched across the polished floors, and Emily found herself following Alexander through the winding corridors, her steps measured yet light, as if testing the rhythm of this unexpected partnership. He paused briefly at the entrance to the library, a grand room lined with shelves that reached the ceiling, filled with leather-bound volumes and delicate ornaments that caught the sunlight, and gestured for her to explore while he adjusted the arrangement of a few scattered papers on the large oak desk, the subtle motion revealing the meticulous care he invested in his surroundings, a reflection of his personality that Emily had only begun to glimpse. She wandered among the shelves, fingers lightly tracing the spines, absorbing the quiet dignity of the space, and occasionally catching the sound of his movement behind her. Each step a reminder of his presence, the unspoken connection between them growing with every shared glance and gesture, a dialogue carried entirely by attention and subtle cues. A gentle breeze drifted in from the slightly open window, lifting loose strands of her hair and drawing Alexander's gaze, which lingered with quiet fascination, a mixture of intrigue and appreciation that neither needed to articulate, and Emily felt a warmth rise in her chest. A recognition that she was being truly seen in a way that transcended the formality of titles and roles. He finally approached, his shadow merging with hers as they stood near the window, and asked her thoughts on a passage from a book she had selected, his voice calm, yet probing, inviting her perspective and valuing her insight in a manner that was unexpected and disarming, and Emily responded with careful consideration, words flowing naturally as she found herself swept into a dialogue that felt both exhilarating and grounding, a meeting of intellect and curiosity that neither could ignore. The sunlight shifted as clouds passed overhead, altering the patterns on the floor and adding a dynamic rhythm to their exchange, and Emily realized that each interaction, each small observation and gesture, was building a tapestry of understanding and subtle trust, an intricate dance of awareness that defied the ordinary expectations of their environment. Alexander, noting her thoughtful responses and the subtle spark of animation in her expression, felt a rare sense of admiration and intrigue, an acknowledgement that her presence had introduced an unpredictable element into the precise structure of his world, a tension that was not chaotic but charged with possibility. The library, with its hushed ambience and filtered light, became a stage for the quiet unfolding of their connection, and as Emily set a volume back on its shelf and turned to face him, their eyes met once more, a silent promise of discovery lingering in the air, the unspoken anticipation of what could follow weaving between them, leaving both acutely aware that this day, ordinary in its beginning, had transformed into an encounter that neither of them would soon forget, and that the story unfolding between them was only beginning to reveal its depth and unexpected resonance. As the afternoon light waned, casting a warm amber glow through the tall windows, Alexander and Emily moved toward the sunroom, the glass panes reflecting a kaleidoscope of shifting shadows that danced across the wooden floors. Emily carried a small tray of tea, her steps careful yet steady, aware of the unspoken attention Alexander paid to each motion, and when she placed the cups on the polished table, his gaze lingered on the subtle grace in her gestures, the quiet confidence she exuded even in the simplest of tasks, a contrast to the grandiosity surrounding them. They sat across from one another, the space between them filled with an electric tension softened by the golden light and the faint scent of blooming flowers from the garden beyond, and Alexander asked questions that ventured beyond routine conversation, probing into Emily's thoughts on literature, music, and the small joy she cherished, each inquiry deliberate yet gentle, inviting her to share layers of herself rarely observed by others in his meticulously curated world. Emily, feeling the rare freedom to express her genuine self, spoke with increasing ease, her words painting vivid glimpses of her personality, her curiosity, and the experiences that shaped her perspective, and Alexander found himself leaning in, captivated not by the role she held, but by the depth of character revealed in her every sentence and movement. A soft breeze drifted in, lifting the edges of the lace curtains and brushing against their faces, and in that moment, their eyes met again, holding a silent dialogue, a recognition of mutual understanding and unspoken respect, the kind that arises not from titles or status, but from a shared human connection and the quiet acknowledgement of potential unfolding. The room seemed to shrink around them, the ambient light accentuating the contours of their expressions and the subtle shifts in posture, and Emily noticed the way Alexander's attention never wavered, a steady focus that conveyed both authority and genuine interest, prompting a response within her that was equal parts admiration and curiosity. Time passed unnoticed as they explored thoughts, impressions, and fleeting observations, each exchange layering intrigue and awareness, a delicate interplay of intellect and emotion that neither could ignore. Alexander observed the thoughtful tilt of her head, the precision of her speech, the natural cadence of her movements, and realized that the day had transformed into a remarkable encounter, one that defied the expectations of formality and hierarchy, revealing instead a subtle, compelling energy between them that demanded further exploration. Emily, sensing the rhythm of his attention, allowed herself small moments of candid expression, a fleeting smile or an emphatic gesture, each met with attentive consideration, creating a fluid dialogue that spoke volumes without the need for elaborate explanation. As they finally rose from their seats to move toward the adjoining corridor, both carried with them the quiet anticipation of possibilities, the recognition that the unfolding connection had already shifted the dynamic of the day, and that each subsequent interaction would be imbued with the delicate balance of curiosity, awareness, and the electric, almost imperceptible, pull of discovery that neither could yet fully articulate, but both felt deeply. The evening descended softly upon the mansion, the last rays of sunlight painting the walls in warm, fading hues, and Emily followed Alexander down a narrow corridor lined with portraits whose eyes seemed to observe their passage, their expressions frozen in time, yet somehow alive under the shifting light. He paused before a large door with intricate carvings, motioning for her to enter first, and she stepped inside. The sound of her heels muted against the polished floor, heart quickening as the room revealed itself as a study, shelves stacked with leather-bound books and delicate artifacts, each piece reflecting a story and a careful choice, and she realized that every detail mirrored the meticulousness of the man who guided her here. Alexander remained by the doorway, his posture relaxed yet commanding, and Emily could not help but notice the subtle play of shadows across his features, the soft glow from the desk lamp catching the edges of his cheekbones, lending a warmth to the otherwise formidable presence he carried effortlessly, and she felt a flicker of anticipation ripple through her, an awareness that something significant was unfolding beyond the routine of their day. She moved closer to the desk, fingers brushing the polished wood, the quiet hum of the room amplifying the intimacy of shared space, and Alexander began to speak of the objects around them, not with authority or instruction, but with thoughtful explanation, drawing her into the history, the meaning, and the silent narratives contained within each artifact, and Emily listened intently, captivated not only by the information, but by the way he revealed a side of himself that was rarely seen, a depth that balanced precision with passion, intellect with genuine curiosity. As she responded, offering observations and interpretations of her own, he leaned slightly, allowing his presence to merge with the space between them without overwhelming. And in their dialogue, subtle nuances emerged, a conversation layered with insight, empathy, and unspoken respect, each gesture and glance reinforcing the growing connection that had begun in fleeting moments earlier in the day. The room seemed to breathe with them, warm light, reflecting off surfaces, the faint ticking of a clock marking time but not rushing it. And Emily sensed the careful rhythm of interaction, a give and take that encouraged authenticity and reflection, drawing her deeper into the interplay of intellect and awareness that Alexander so effortlessly facilitated. A breeze drifted through a partially opened window, lifting loose strands of her hair and brushing her sleeve, and he instinctively adjusted a curtain, a quiet act of consideration that she noticed, interpreting it as a small acknowledgement of presence and attention, and in that gesture, she felt a gentle reassurance that their interaction was not fleeting or superficial, but rather a prelude to more substantial discovery. As the shadows lengthened and evening light softened into a muted glow, Alexander regarded her with measured interest, eyes scanning for subtle cues, reactions, and expressions, and Emily, aware of his observation, maintained a poised yet natural demeanor, each moment infused with mutual recognition of thoughtfulness, curiosity, and anticipation. leaving both acutely conscious that the day had progressed into an encounter that held layers of meaning, promising more revelations and insights in the conversations and shared silences yet to come. The sun had fully dipped below the horizon, leaving the mansion bathed in the soft glow of strategically placed lamps that highlighted the elegance of the architecture, and Emily followed Alexander down the sweeping staircase, her footsteps echoing lightly, a rhythmic accompaniment to the quiet hum of evening activity in the distant rooms. He paused at a landing, motioning toward a small balcony that overlooked the illuminated gardens, and Emily stepped forward, the warm light spilling over her features, casting subtle shadows that danced across her expression, and she felt an unexpected sense of liberation, as if the space itself invited her to pause and breathe, to take in the moment fully. Alexander remained slightly behind, observing her with an intensity that balanced authority with genuine curiosity, his gaze tracing the delicate contours of her posture, the thoughtful lift of her chin, and the subtle movements of her hands as she leaned against the railing, noting how her presence seemed to bring life to the carefully curated environment, a vitality he had not anticipated encountering in someone of her role. A gentle evening breeze stirred the air, carrying the faint scent of blooming roses, lifting strands of her hair, and he instinctively adjusted a drape, a small gesture that conveyed attentiveness without intrusiveness. And Emily noticed, acknowledging it with a quiet, almost imperceptible smile, a recognition of shared awareness and subtle connection that did not require words. The gardens below shimmered with lights, fountains reflecting the amber glow, and she spoke softly about the arrangement of the pathways, the interplay of light and shadow, and the careful design choices that mirrored his own attention to detail. And Alexander listened with a rare openness, responding with observations that revealed insight, humor, and a sense of respect for her perspective, creating a dialogue that moved effortlessly between intellect and reflection, each sentence building layers of understanding. Emily felt the unusual ease of conversation, the sense that her thoughts and observations were valued, and she allowed herself to speak more freely, noting small curiosities about the evening air, the scent of the flowers, and the subtle music that drifted from within the mansion, while Alexander, in turn, shared reflections, occasionally pausing to watch her reactions. The faintest lift of her eyebrows, the quickening of a smile, or the thoughtful tilt of her head, interpreting them as cues in their ongoing, silent exchange. Time seemed to slow, the mansion and gardens, creating a cocoon in which their connection deepened, a quiet intimacy of shared attention, respect, and subtle fascination, each aware of the other in ways that extended beyond conversation into the realm of perception, anticipation, and discovery. As they turned back toward the interior, Alexander allowed a small laugh, warm and unguarded, to break the silence, and Emily responded with a nod and a similarly soft smile, a mutual acknowledgement of the rare and unexpected nature of the evening, leaving both with a heightened awareness of curiosity, possibility, and the delicate thread of connection that had been woven between them, promising that the unfolding story of their day was far from complete. The night had settled fully over the mansion, stars twinkling faintly through the expansive windows, and Alexander led Emily to a quiet sitting area near the library, the soft glow of strategically placed lamps casting gentle light across the polished floors and elegant furnishings, creating an intimate atmosphere that contrasted with the grandeur of the surrounding halls. Emily placed a small book she had been carrying onto the side table, and Alexander, standing slightly behind her, observed the careful arrangement of her movements, noting how her presence seemed to naturally balance the imposing elegance of the room, a quiet harmony that intrigued him deeply. He invited her to sit, and as she settled into the plush armchair, the subtle rustle of fabric echoed softly, emphasizing the calm yet charged energy that filled the space. And he remained standing for a moment, considering how to begin a conversation that went beyond the routines and formalities that usually defined their interactions, finally choosing a gentle approach, asking her thoughts about the evening, the design of the gardens, and the subtle details that often went unnoticed. Emily responded thoughtfully, her voice steady yet warm, revealing insights about the interplay of light, shadow, and perspective, and Alexander listened intently, allowing moments of silence to punctuate their exchange. each pause inviting reflection and drawing attention to the mutual respect and curiosity that had steadily grown between them. The night air drifted in through a slightly opened window, carrying the faint scent of jasmine, and a loose strand of Emily's hair brushed against her cheek, catching the light, and Alexander, without overstepping, subtly adjusted the curtain to prevent it from falling further, a simple act of consideration that conveyed attentiveness and a quiet acknowledgement of her presence, which she noticed and accepted with a small, sincere smile, strengthening the unspoken connection. As they continued to share observations and reflections, the atmosphere between them deepened, each word, glance, and gesture layering intrigue, understanding, and subtle anticipation, the mansion around them a silent witness to the unfolding dynamic of trust and curiosity. Alexander noted the thoughtful expressions that crossed her face, the natural rhythm of her speech, and the subtle movements that punctuated her observations, and he felt a rare sense of admiration, a recognition of qualities that went beyond the expected roles, a depth of character and perspective that was quietly captivating. Emily, in turn, was aware of the attentiveness and respect with which he engaged her thoughts, the careful balance of authority and openness in his demeanor, and she felt a renewed confidence and curiosity, realizing that the evening had evolved into a space where genuine exchange and mutual acknowledgement created an unexpected yet compelling resonance. The room seemed to hold its breath with them, the quiet hum of the night, the soft illumination, and the subtle scent of the air contributing to an ambience that encouraged reflection, attentiveness, and unspoken understanding, leaving both Alexander and Emily acutely aware that this night marked not just a series of shared moments, but the beginning of a story rich with potential, curiosity, and the gentle pull of connection that would continue to unfold in the hours and days to come. The mansion had quieted into a serene stillness, the distant hum of the city barely audible beyond the thick walls, and Alexander and Emily lingered in the sitting area near the library, each caught in the reflective calm of the evening, the ambient light casting soft highlights on their faces and accentuating the depth of their expressions. Emily adjusted a cushion on the armchair and settled more comfortably, her movements deliberate and unhurried. Sensing the unspoken invitation of shared presence rather than conversation, and Alexander, standing nearby with a contemplative gaze, noticed the subtle grace in her posture, the way she carried herself with composed confidence, and felt a rare moment of admiration that was quiet yet profound. He finally spoke, his voice steady and measured, inviting her to share her thoughts on the day, not the tasks or duties, but the impressions and insights that had shaped her perspective. And Emily responded thoughtfully, her words revealing glimpses of curiosity, resilience, and perception, each observation met with attentive listening and occasional nods that encouraged her to continue, deepening the sense of connection between them. The night air drifted through the slightly opened window, bringing with it the scent of night-blooming jasmine and a subtle chill that brushed against her skin, prompting a faint shiver that Alexander noticed, prompting him to adjust a nearby throw blanket across the arm of the chair with quiet consideration, a small act that conveyed awareness and care without intrusion, reinforcing the sense of mutual respect and attentiveness. As their dialogue unfolded, they shared reflections on light, shadow, design, and perspective, and even in the pauses between words, the space was charged with the gentle energy of observation, thoughtfulness, and curiosity, each aware of the other's attention and reaction, interpreting subtle gestures, fleeting expressions, and the cadence of speech as part of a larger, unspoken conversation. Emily found herself increasingly comfortable, offering insights and personal impressions with a sincerity that seemed to invite trust, and Alexander, in turn, allowed glimpses of a more relaxed, contemplative self to emerge, a side rarely shown to anyone outside the meticulously controlled world of his daily life, creating a dynamic of authentic engagement that felt rare and valuable. The lamps cast gentle pools of light across the furniture and floor, shadows moving subtly with the flicker of evening, and each movement, glance, and expression between them contributed to an evolving narrative of awareness, curiosity, and silent fascination, a tapestry woven from attention, thought, and the unspoken possibilities that hung in the air. As the hour deepened, both since the quiet shift of the day toward reflection, the acknowledgement of shared understanding, and the anticipation of what further interactions might reveal, leaving a lingering sense that this evening had changed the tenor of their connection, and that the moments spent together, so carefully observed and mutually respected, were only the beginning of a story rich with depth, insight, and the unfolding potential of discovery between two people whose paths had intersected in a manner both subtle and profoundly impactful.